So I'm going to go ahead and kick off the recording here today. And Derek, I expect other people to join in. It's just always, as you can appreciate from a Zoom standpoint, people kind of come and join. And as Jude points out, right, we actually do get a lot of people that watch these recordings, after the fact.
Mhm.
So it is hugely appreciated that you are willing to spend time with us today, because this actually has a lot of outreach, and as you and I spoke before about your program, about what you're teaching up there, there's a lot of connectedness with invasive species and habitat restoration that make a lot of sense for us here in Southwest in the true Southwest Washington here. So I've given you, you should have screen sharing privilege if this material you want to share, and I'll turn it over to you. Do indicate, this is a lively bunch, lots of questions, right? So there will be no shortage of discussion.
Okay, well, thank you. And I do have a presentation to share, and I'll hopefully be able to move through that so that we can move into discussion. Um, okay, so hopefully you are seeing. I want to go into the full presentation view, so let me make sure. I don't often present in PowerPoint over Zoom, so I have to make sure that I'm
Yeah,
doing
open up your slideshow and then make sure you're selecting that screen.
right.
Yeah, there you go. We're there.
Yep. Okay, so that should be in full screen, and I'm going to shift some stuff around so that I can see. Okay, so various folks have asked me over time to share some of the work that we have been doing on Clover Park Technical College's outdoor lab property. So I guess by way of introduction, my name is Derek Faust, and I am one of the instructors in the environmental sciences program at Clover Park Technical College. And we are fortunate enough to have an outdoor lab property right across the street from the college. And I'll share a little bit more details about that in just a few moments. So my presentation is we will eventually win the battle. Habitat restoration at Clover Park Technical College. And I think you'll see why I have that eventually in parenthesis as we move forward. So just a bit about the college itself. We have two campuses. Our main campus is in Lakewood, Washington. We do have another campus that's primarily for our aviation programs in South Hill. We offer over 42 at this point, associate and certificate degree programs, and we have 5 Bachelor of Applied Science programs. So you can go to our website, find out more about what we offer. And it's not just degree granting programs. We have certificate programs. We have continuing education as well. So a lot of good things going on. And this is where we get to be a little bit interactive. I am a teacher, so this is what I do with my students. So what level of education, and I had I thought about it, I could have like created some type of polling device to use, but could just sort of do it verbally. What level of education do you think is necessary for a STEM career? Anyone willing to share high school, associate degree, bachelor's degree, or higher?
How about trying the middle associate degree?
Okay. Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that. Anyone else?
I
Have
was actually
thoughts?
gonna jump into even high school because I know I'm helping to participate in a STEM curricula for instructors at the grade school level. Next week they're coming down here for a coastal exercise in STEM pedagogy. So
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great.
So Yeah, I think you can 100% and have a STEM related career with a high school diploma. And of course it depends on you know um, what type of career you're looking at, and uh, but the main thing here is that as you advance through degrees, like other career paths or other fields of study, um, a lot of times more opportunities will open up for you, but sometimes it's actually less. Someone with a master's degree or PhD may actually sort of, if you will, educate themselves out of some jobs in terms of you'll be looked at as, why are you applying for this job? You're overqualified. And I know that sounds really strange to say, but um, it's sort of true. There, you sometimes reduce the number of jobs as you get a more advanced degree. Not all the time, but um, so definitely high school diploma. But I usually ask this of high school students to see what they think, because I think a lot of people think environmental science and they automatically think bachelor's degree. And I think that's the case for a lot of STEM careers. But that is not true. We in at Clover Park have been offering associate degree programs for quite a while. Um, so uh, our program trains students for a wide range of career opportunities in environmental science. Being that we are at a technical college, we are focused on hands-on training and development of professional skills. There are currently two instructors in the program, myself and Catherine Smith. Um, and generally, we have class 4 days a week in the time frame between 9 to 3. It's not always a full day, but for all students, but it's within that time frame. So we started off, and the program has offered two associate's degrees. Um, Associate's Applied Technology degree, and that includes some general education classes. And then our other associate's degree is a transferable Associates of Applied Science. The T there stands for transfer. And basically, the biggest difference between these two degree programs is the AAST, the transferable degree, requires a higher level math like calculus or statistics. And we tend to recommend that students take statistics because it's more relevant in environmental science. Um, our associates programs are about 6 quarters of program classes, and students can start in any quarter. We're on a quarter-based system, so fall, winter, spring, or summer start. But you do have those general education courses. And then for the Bachelor's of Applied Science, that is a brand new program. It just started this fall. So I am currently teaching one of the courses in that program this quarter, and it's a brand new course, brand new program. So we decided to do that bachelor's program because we were seeing a lot of job announcements that had bachelor's degree required, even though our students could do all the skills that they wanted people to be able to do. So it was more of a checkbox. That wasn't the only reason, but we wanted to open up those opportunities for students. So just to give you an idea of the different types of topics that we teach in our associates program. And actually I should have taken Introduction to Air Pollution out because that moved to the bachelor's program. That was an error that I missed. I missed taking that one, moving that one. But a lot of different things. Everything from what we say is the green side, which is what I teach under my last name, Faust, ecology, chemistry, hydrology, watersheds, wetlands class, to the more brown side of environmental science, which is we have polluted the earth, and hopefully here's what we can do to work on that pollution. So hazardous waste site operations, soils, issues in the urban environment, which is how do we have clean drinking water? How do we treat our wastewater, and stuff like that. Here's a small selection of the courses. Well, not a small. This is most of the courses in the bachelor's program. There are a couple other general education courses I didn't list here, but air pollution, applications of environmental science 1 and 2. Those courses are focused on animal biology, animal geology, topics like toxicology, and some additional chemistry skills. GIS is Geographic Information Systems, environmental law, and then NPDS permitting. NPDS is National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. It's something that a lot of jurisdictions have to do, so good skill for our students to have. And then you'll see there's a lot of, on the right side, general biology, public speaking, writing, communication, what I like to think of as the soft skills. And then you have things like project management and quality management, some management classes, because as students move up in their career, they will get into management, and having a management class will be helpful to them. So as I said, we focus on hands-on learning, and here are just a few pictures. And I only have one class from my co-instructor's side of the program, because that's what I had access to, you know. So the photo in the top right is in the hazardous waste site operations class. So they get into hazmat suits and clean up a mock hazmat site. And my co-instructor tries to, you know, trick them into doing something wrong, because that's how you learn. We would rather, as my co-instructor puts it, we would rather you die in a simulation than die in real life. And that goes across the board. We also focus very much so on the health and safety aspect in our other courses, making sure that students understand how to use equipment properly.
But if you to go back to the last picture on the upper left, that if I show up with crutches, then am I excused from having to get dirty?
To a certain extent, not, yeah, but you can see that student, and that student was they really, yeah, they were a go-getter. And I said, well, you can just stay on the bank. We were looking at benthic macroinvertebrates. I said, you know, you can stay on the bank. And they're like, no, I can get down there. Okay. We just made sure that they had safe access and could get down there safely. But yes, there are certain things that a student in crutches would not be able to participate in, and we'd have to figure out whether they just, you know, take that quarter off to heal up, which we've had a student do, or if we can work it out otherwise. So where the brunt of the work has been going on for in terms of habitat stewardship or habitat restoration is on what we call the FLET property. It has a nice long name, Natural Resources Laboratory and Research Park at Flat Creek. So you can see why we call it the FLET property for short. The reason that we call it, or it has FLET in the name, is because it is on the former site of the FLET Dairy. So in 1993, the college purchased about 110 acres of the former FLET Dairy.
That's an amazing number of trees, Derek.
Yes, absolutely.
Oak trees, I mean. Yeah.
Absolutely. We are very lucky to have the site. 700 mature Gary oaks. And it was a mast year for acorns this year as well. So yes, absolutely unbelievable. We believe it's the largest stand of Gary oaks in an incorporated city in Washington. If it wasn't for JBLM, we could say that it was the largest stand in Pierce County and perhaps beyond. But JBLM has quite the stand of Gary Oaks. Then the other awesome part is that we have 80 acres of flat wetland, which, with me being a wetland person, my water bottle is filled with wetland stickers. I know that the word is probably backwards, but I'm a wetlands person, a water person. So having that, again, right across the street from our main campus, a 5-minute walk to get there. So to that point, and let's see, I know that there's a way I can do change it to a, there it is, laser pointer. There we go. So this is the main campus here, south of Stelcombe Boulevard. And then our property, the outdoor lab property, is all this here. And most of the 700 Gary Oaks, you can see here in the upland portion. There are some Gary Oaks on the north side of the wetland. And then all this in here is flat wetland, which you can see continues downstream. And Flat Creek eventually forms here and runs along here. But we own what's in red. We have the Gary Oaks. With it being a former dairy, a lot of what's present is in terms of vegetation is it's dominated by dairy grasses. But we do still have some of the native wildflowers. We have common camas, death camas, lady's tress, obviously the Gary Oaks, and this is a chocolate lily, and then all sorts of wildlife, birds, and other wildlife make use of the habitat. And then the wetland, this is
curious with respect to those, are those flowers and stuff native, or did you have to go back and restore those?
So those were ones that were there. To my knowledge, I don't think anyone planted them, but I can't be certain about that. Because I've been here a little over 5 years, and the previous instructor had passed away had an untimely passing, unexpected. So there was a lot of, I guess, knowledge about the property that was lost for that reason. So, but I think all of these were sort of holdovers, those native wildflowers from even before the dairy.
Yeah. Could I ask again what the middle flower on the bottom row is?
So it goes by a number of names, common names. I call it chocolate lily is the one that.
Yes. Okay. Good. Yeah. Fritillaria. Yeah.
Yes, it is a fritillaria. Yes.
Derek, do you get much? I'm curious. Going back to the overall map, it looks like you've got a lot of residential housing all around the property. So does that an impact, and from a negative sense, on the habitat restoration?
So not really, because we have a buffer between the housing, like in terms of a buffer, particularly for the wetland. There's a buffer. And yeah, we haven't had too many issues with the housing in terms of it impacting the restoration. But more so, I think, is, just making that observation that you made. This is, in terms of, for people and wildlife, really, for both, more so for the wildlife in my mind, but for people as well. It's a refuge in the middle of a very urbanized landscape. Okay. Okay, and then the wetland, like I said, most of the property, 80 acres, is a portion of flat wetland. So this only shows a small portion of it, but I always like this picture, having the great blue heron, my favorite bird. And it shows, different habitat types within the wetland itself. This is another view, same area, but you can see at this point it had dried out a little bit, which can happen. And the reason that this can dry out is I'll go back a few slides. The water coming into the wetland is actually coming from stormwater detention basins from stormwater that's coming from the city of Tacoma. So they have a pump station right here, right before the wetland, and they pump water out of this pond into the wetland. So sometimes when we've been low on rain, things start to dry up a little bit. Okay. And of course, the wetland holds all sorts of wildlife. This is just a small collection. We have beavers. This is a beaver lodge here. My camera had water droplets on it. It was a waterproof camera, but some droplets. And there is some restoration that we do in coordination with the city of Tacoma to try to restore that along the stream that runs through the wetland a little bit.
God, I'd like to see it right now. Is that open to the public?
The wetland and the property. So
yeah, yes.
Yes, is the short answer. It's there's a gate along Stelcombe Boulevard, but that's not locked. The biggest thing that we just ask is that people be respectful when they're on the property. Stay on trails if you see a trail and that type of thing.
Sure.
Yeah. So just to show you the importance here in a couple different ways. This is the Chambers Clover Creek watershed, or a portion of it. The wetland is actually right here. It's not shown. I don't have an aerial, but you'll see that Flet Creek and Flet Wetland right here have documented spawning and presumed presence of coho, documented presence of chum salmon. Winter steelhead have been documented and their presence is presumed. And then Chinook, there's potential for Chinook, but there is a blockage from Chambers Dam, which is right. I think Chambers Dam is somewhere in here, down here lower in the watershed. So it could be the wetland, although it's not spawning habitat, it can be good rearing habitat for salmon and other salmonids like trout. Outside of in the wetlands, I have trail cameras deployed, and I go out and take pictures as well. So all sorts of wildlife. Some, coyotes and raccoons do very well in urban environments. Things like red-tailed hawks, red-legged frog here down in the center, wood ducks. Yeah, they need a little bit different and less urbanized environment. And then this
osprey.
It is an osprey. So that is not on it's on campus. That's on our communications tower. But the osprey then go down and fish in the wetland.
Wow, nice.
Yeah. And they return every year. People actually get quite concerned if they think that they should be back in the spring and they haven't yet returned. And I basically, say, it's okay. They'll be, unless something happened, they'll be back. We'll keep an eye out for them. And we have applied to a couple grants to we'd like to do a nest camera up there. It would give a much different perspective of what's going on in the nest, because they successfully raise at least a couple chicks every year. So we have Gary Oaks, as I said, over 700 of them on our property. This is the estimated historic range of Gary Oaks. So you can see it extended all the way down into California, even almost in the Southern California pieces of it. And on the right, it's the historic local range. So this map, it's difficult to see, but the yellowish color, the yellowish brown color, that is what was prairie and oaks were associated with the prairies at the time of the Puget Sound Agricultural Company's land claim around the Nisqually and between Nisqually and Puyallup River basins, basically. So you can see that the prairie ecosystem and the oaks were quite extensive in the region. And historically, they extended up and down the West Coast. But now it's estimated that only 3 to 5% of oaks are of the historic range remains. And the oaks are in isolated areas. So it's not very broad like what we see with the on the right, but rather small chunks. And usually you don't have 700 trees within an area either, particularly in urban environments. So again, pretty special that we have that, and pretty important that we protect that as well. So 97% of the prairies in our region are gone. Anyone have any guesses to why that might be?
Farming and development, right?
Yep, that's about it. Or at least goes back to those two things, right?
Yeah.
So settlers,
suppression.
yeah, settlers planted European grasses and introduced grazers like cows and pigs. And the European pasture grasses replaced the native bunch grasses, and some wildflowers can't grow up through that grass thatch that's left behind. And then early blooming wildflowers like Western buttercup do seem to be doing a little bit better than the other native wildflowers. You also have fire suppression. So the prairies and the oak savannas were maintained, if you will, by the indigenous peoples. The species that occur in the prairies are actually fire adapted. And the indigenous people would burn them because it provided a food source. Things like camas, they would harvest camas bulbs, and that would provide them with a starchy food source throughout the winter. Invasive species, which is what we'll talk quite a bit about, moved in and just outcompete. And then Douglas firs, because Douglas firs weren't being burned anymore by the indigenous people, they were able to move into the prairies and shade out the prairie plants and the oaks as well. And then, yes, the soil is quite ideal for urban development as well. And then we also have a wetland. So we know that wetlands perform a lot of critical functions, and that the functions have value to society. They are so-called ecosystem services. So very similar reasons as to why the wetlands are mostly gone. They weren't valued historically. Some old maps refer to them as low-lying waste places. How sad. Couldn't see the value through all the water that couldn't be turned into development. So they were filled. Some of the shallower ones were filled for farming or development, or drained for those reasons. Even the tribes didn't always treat wetlands well. Some documentation that the Tulalip tribe used the wetland as a dump, particularly as Seattle grew. And then 90%, we can see 91% actually of California's wetlands are gone. And although it's not shown in the map, 31% have been filled in Washington. So,
and Derek, I wonder if this is an opportunity to speak to what I'm very impressed with your CV is the background that you have. I mean, you started in Pennsylvania, right? Went to school in Mississippi, Texas, did postgraduate work in North Dakota, and here you are in Washington. How do you, is there any comment with respect to having moved east to west, south to north, relative to wetland and habitat maintenance and sensitivity, I should say, culturally?
Yeah. So it's very hard to put a pulse on that. because I would say East Coast probably on average a little bit more wetland loss, but then you see California at that 91% loss of their wetlands. I um, I think because the East Coast was obviously the first where European settlers landed and started to develop, there's probably a little bit more loss of wetland and other important habitats there. As you move west, obviously here in Washington, we have a lot of national parks and national forests, but the urban environments, I honestly, while I would say urban development is one of the bigger issues. Agricultural development can be an issue for wetlands as well, but farmers will oftentimes drain wetlands, right? But then they won't, if that area stops being farmed or something changes, the farmer might decide to restore, just let that wetland come back. Whereas if something's filled for urban development, how do we even know it was there, and how do we get it back? So it's very difficult to put a pulse on it. Mississippi, there are wetlands everywhere, but I also know that again in the agricultural regions, a lot of where wetlands used to be have been drained for agriculture because it's very rich soil. So yeah, it's hard to draw any generalizations, other than to say that in your more rural states, agriculture is going to be the bigger impact on wetlands in particular. And when you move into more rural or urban landscapes, the urban environment has most certainly impacted wetlands. So I don't, in terms of like who might care more, it's very difficult to say. Is that I don't know if that got
No,
to you.
that's good, Derek. And I just trying to get a feel for, because I view you with a national perspective on this, right? And it, by the way, it's good. And what I'm reading between the lines here is I think you're seeing that we've become more sensitive to the importance of wetlands and to the fact of restoring and maintaining wetlands. And I think would you attest that's a national phenomenon? It's not just that we in the West are more tuned into it than other parts of the country.
Yes, and part of that is the regulations surrounding wetlands. If you impact a wetland, you have to mitigate for that loss, right? You have to create a new wetland or restore a wetland. And just that, it's a big rabbit hole to go down, but I'll just mention it briefly. Recently, there was a case that went to the Supreme Court that really impacted what water bodies are considered regulated at the federal government level by the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers. Most people refer to it as waters of the United States. And despite you might, if you go and look this up, you'll see reporting that'll say that it was the conservative justices that made this ruling. And it's sort of, there's a half truth there. The case that was actually brought by landowners that started building on a wetland and filling in a wetland without a permit, and the EPA and the Army Corps said you can't do that, and they started to sue, went up to the Supreme Court. It was actually a 9-0 decision. All 9 justices ruled in favor of these landowners. Where people get into I would say the politics of it and saying that it was the conservative justices that struck this down, is that they were the majority opinion. And like I said, it's a big rabbit hole to go down, but that could have some impact. But in Washington State has waters of the state, and wetlands will be protected in that way. So states can also have their own regulations as well. So it's when it comes to wetlands, it's very complicated.
I put a link to that that Supreme Court case in the chat because that really was a big deal. And yeah.
So getting into the habitat restoration, which I think is what was the major selling point. Although I do have, as Kelly mentioned, I have a lot of experiences. I've seen a lot of different things, so I'm happy to talk about those things. So over the past, I'd say 2 years, I've been working with students and community members to do some restoration on our outdoor lab property. So the process is straightforward in terms of words, much less straightforward in terms of action. Remove the invasive plants. Easier said than done. Plant native species and spread native seed mixes. That's not actually too difficult, but getting things to live and grow can be sometimes. So the invasive species that we are dealing with on our outdoor lab property, the big ones anyway, big problem makers are Himalayan blackberry, and there is some evergreen blackberry, which is also invasive. Scotch broom is the other big one, and then we do have some English ivy, St. John's wort, and one that I don't have listed here is holly as well. And we started off focusing close in 2 habitats, in the Gary Oaks and then in the riparian area of the wetland. So the trees that you see listed here are more riparian species. But in terms of, we have planted some Gary Oaks, and then the seed mixes is a combination of dry and wet meadow. So the wet meadow would go closer to the wetland. And then because I got tired of being busted by the birds I was trying to take pictures of in the wetland, we constructed a couple bird blinds near open water areas of the wetland. So battle number one, or fight number one, and you can see I didn't take a picture, a before picture, until right there. There's a student that's running a brush cutter, and they had cut a path down to this open area of the wetland. But you can see some English ivy here in the foreground of the photo. There's the student running the brush cutter, hauling it out. This was during COVID, so outside you could, we were allowed to either mask or not mask, but we're beyond that now. It's more of when it's necessary, which is I'm glad for. And then after, you can see that we were successful in getting a path cut down to the wetland, to that open water area. And we started grubbing the roots of those blackberries, digging up the roots. With a second group of students, a couple quarters later, we started to work on some of the English ivy up in the top of the hill, and then continued grubbing roots with the blackberry and working on the blackberries. And then once we were done, we had done a pretty good job. This path was pretty well cleared. And you can see pretty small group of students, or the unpaid labor. They get payment because it's part of the class. It's hands-on experience. So they are actually graded in doing this. And basically the grade is from participation and working. And then the most recent set of students, and I want to point out, in between these sets of students, community members are coming in. We hold monthly habitat stewardship events. So some of the other work, you'll see some pictures from community members helping out as well. So working in the same area, we were able to clear out the blackberry roots, and the cages that you see here, the chicken wire cages, those are trees that we planted.
What were they? What kind?
Yeah, so black cottonwood, Pacific crabapple, red alder, Oregon ash, cascara, and I feel like I'm missing one, but
This before picture on the upper left corner is that what? A service berry or
This guy here?
foreign? Yeah.
Uh, yeah. It's either a mock orange, but I think it actually is a service berry or yeah. Yep.
Okay, good. That's good.
There is a mock orange right there as well. Yeah. Yeah. So we have a ton of natives. It's just that the down by the wetland, you can see all the blackberries in this photo. So we've cleared out some patches, but there's a lot more.
And so the method for clearing, right, was just primarily just hand cultural methods of just digging up. So there was no pesticides were applied. You chose not to go that route.
Yeah, we chose not to go that route because we don't have anyone that's a certified pesticide applicator. And certainly that is an option, right? But
I guess there'd also be the risk to the wetland too, I would think, right? And
yeah,
if a herbicide runoff, right?
That's correct. We would have to use an herbicide that would be aquatic friendly, and they do make those, right? But again, it's more about me not having an applicator's license, and wanting students to understand, if you know how to do it the hard way, if they go out and get a job and they get their pesticide applicator's license, they'll understand, oh, I did it the hard way. This is the easier way. But with invasive species, there is I honestly don't feel that there is an easy way, because this is fight number 3, and with each fight we had blackberries growing back. Sometimes you don't get the whole root. Each berry has probably between, I don't know, up to a dozen, let's say, seeds in it. So they can come back from seed. So it's a lot of work just to maintain the work that you've accomplished, let alone expanding and moving. We're moving in this direction is the plan to the east.
Yeah, Derek, is there any evidence that frequent cutting of the blackberry can get rid of them in time? I assume your fight number 3 is 3 years. Is that correct?
It's not quite 3 years. I would say this is over the course of a 2-year period.
Okay.
Yes. So frequent cutting can be effective. Yes.
Also heard planting seed grass to smother the blackberries out and mowing as well. Is that anything pertinent?
It can be. Yeah, it can be. I think if you're wanting to mow it, yeah, it is going to have to be frequent. And blackberries are incredibly resilient. So even if you're mowing them, even if they just have a short little stem, they can hang tight with that short little stem. In this area that you see here, we've cleared that and grubbed the roots pretty well. And there's small ones that in a couple weeks I'll be taking my students out. We'll be working on those small blackberries first before we move. So frequent cutting can work. I've not had any experience with that myself, like trying it and seeing what the results are. But I do know, I've read that frequent cutting can work.
And you chose here just to do this very manually, just with weed whackers, as opposed with say a DR mower or something like that.
Yeah. So what might be difficult to see now, down here it's pretty flat, but like right here, you can see that bird blind that's up at the top of the hill. So this bird blind in this photo, this after photo, that's where I'm taking the photo from up here. That's a pretty steep hillside. So using like a brush hog or something to that effect would be a little bit more difficult. But where your topography is a little bit more friendly, yeah, I would love to just have someone come with a brush hog um and 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 go along and take out a whole lot of blackberry at once, right? But our topography is a little bit more challenging to do that.
And were you using just weed whacker with a string or with a blade?
Yeah, that's a good question. Great question. So it's a steel weed whacker. It does have a metal blade on it, and you can get two different types of metal blade. One that's good for blackberry. It's sort of has a triangular tip. It comes out in three different blades, if you will. And then you have a blade that you can put on it that is more like a circular saw blade, or a table saw blade that has multiple teeth, and that works well for Scotch broom, cutting Scotch broom, um, which I'll get to in a moment. My feelings on cutting versus pulling Scotch broom as well. Um, I personally think that for blackberries, while repeated cutting might work, um, you can be a little bit more selective by um, using a brush cutter, like a weed whacker brush cutter type of deal. Because what you don't see, there are some natives tucked in here. So if you come with a brush hog, those natives are also getting mowed over as well. So the other, if you don't have a weed whacker brush cutter, the other thing that you can do, it will take a little bit more time, but you can very easily use a pair of loppers and just cut off the canes. So the technique is cut it off about 6 inches from the ground, and then you dig up the roots. Now, the problem is you can see the disturbance that's caused here. And I'm sure y'all can anticipate disturbance invites other invasives or invites invasives back. So you really do, you need to get some type of cover back on there to help compete with whatever wants to come in.
So what would you suggest there? Would you use some native grass that's fast growing, or?
Yeah, so that's we had a native prairie wet meadow mix is what it was called. So yeah, it was a mixture of grasses and some wildflowers as well. We were able to, down really close to the wetland, get a patch established, but up in here have to get some more seed and try to seed it heavier. Um, when you buy seed, they'll say, "Oh, this is good for 500 square feet or 1,000 square feet." That could be true, or might be true, but in my experience,
In a perfect world.
yeah, in a perfect world, and we're not operating in a perfect world. Um, so in my experience, if you cover half of the square footage that they say, you'll be pretty lucky. I tend to seed a little bit heavier to try to get that cover established.
So I have a, so what about a scorched earth approach as opposed to just trying to selectively take out things? Do you ever have any experience with that, with just killing everything and then coming back and having a clean slate?
Um, I have I have not done that myself, and it's mainly because I would say more of a labor perspective, right? And labor and equipment. I think a scorched or earth, like going in with perhaps uh yeah, like a bulldozer and scraping, just
Uh, I
clearing
meant
every.
more like maybe covering it with plastic and
Oh,
leaving it for a year or chemical, that sort of
treatment.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. I've I I I've not done anything like that.
Just wondered how effective it was.
Yeah, I think it is possible, um, depending on the species. So let me go back. So I don't know if you can see it, but in this picture right here, there's some landscaping fabric.
Oh yeah.
So my predecessor was in this area and doing some restoration efforts previously. The blackberries didn't care. They grew right up through that landscaping fabric. And then that makes it more difficult because we're having to cut the landscaping fabric out so that we can actually dig the roots out of the blackberry, right?
Another
It, it
mess.
was it was a fine idea in theory. Um, and maybe if and I think that's the main thing. What you do, whatever you do, make sure you maintain it, right? These invasives will grow back in the areas that you're working. So go back, and when you see them come back, dig them out again.
Any experience with burning? Being targeted burning, with a propane torch.
So we've talked about that. We, for liability reasons, and at first I was like, that's great. We could, like, particularly for the grasses underneath the oaks, right? That those European pasture grasses. It's like, oh, if we could burn an area and then we seed it with the natives. Um, Someone had brought it up, and at first I was like, yes, we can do this. And I actually had a conversation with a friend that now works in Northern California, and um, she's actually been evacuated, or she was evacuated twice during one of Northern California's fires, the Dixie Fire, and and she also works for a timber company, so they use some prescribed burning methods. And she told me basically, I know that you would do everything to make sure that um, you wouldn't lose control of it, but it's a huge liability if you do, right? And I am, just like I'm not a certified pesticide applicator. I could go, right? If I want to, I could go to Home Depot or whatever and buy some Roundup or whatever my choice herbicide would be. And that would be completely legal for me to use those products. Um, but the reason that I don't is because um, I want to teach students that when you're trying to manage for invasive plants with pesticides, most of the time you're not using the off the shelf stuff. You're getting a little bit more commercial grade, and that's why you get trained to be a certified pesticide applicator. And it's the same deal with prescribed burns. Um, you want to have a burn boss, someone that's been trained to do that. Now, if this is like something that's in your backyard, you have an area, and you have some blackberries, you cut them off and you want to try burning them, go for it. It's at your own risk, right? Do it at the correct time of year. Do it at, I would say this time of year, you're like, well, how do you burn stuff in the fall? That's when the tribes burned, um, is my understanding. So yeah, burning can be effective for management of some species as well, but not something that I've tried. And I think it's mainly a skill thing. Do I have the certifications that I can point to, and show my students, hey, if you get this certification, you can do this as well. And it's a that, and then also a scale, like pesticide application, burning, those will happen at a larger scale. And then can you do the keep up with the restoration at that scale, planting trees and that type of thing. And with using student labor, these group of students, they'll spend 6 hours, so 6 hours every other quarter, with students, and then with members of the public, 3 hours once per week. So while a lot of progress can be made, it's not a full-time restoration project, right? We're doing it, I guess you would say, piecemeal.
So you mentioned timing. You say so the indigenous folks you're saying use the fall for their burning. Are there, relative to the species you're trying to control, right? Are there appropriate or inappropriate times to go after them? For example, I've heard that down here, right? You for Scotch broom, for example, you're really kind of concerned about disturbing the soil, right? Because all the seeds from past years are still viable and resident in the adjoining adjacent soils.
Yeah, so there are certain species that you want that are time sensitive. Um, Scotch broom being one of them, but I would even say so. Scotch broom is going to be at its most vulnerable when it's at peak flower, because it's put all that energy into flowering, um, and now if you cut it, it might not be able to grow back. Might not. I am not yet in the pro cut camp of Scotch broom. I'm in the more, I lean a little bit more towards pulling it, but um, cutting I think can be effective. But I think the time of year really makes a big difference. And the reason I say that for Scotch broom is because I do know that there's an area of our outdoor lab property that the Scotch broom was cut using like a brush hog. Um, the previous instructor had a friend that he could borrow a brush hog, and I didn't know that. So the Scotch broom was still growing in that area. I was like, okay, well, this is just something that slowly over time we can remove. I didn't realize that he'd been trying to do repeated cuttings of it year after year to try to kill it. So it grew back. And then when we do go in there to pull the Scotch broom, instead of just having a tap root, which is pretty typical of Scotch broom, a lot of lateral roots. Yeah. So I don't think it actually dies. I think it just is very resilient, and it might grow back from the roots. But we did set up a student intern in spring. They helped me set up an experiment to see cutting versus pulling Scotch broom. In terms of time of year, I don't think there's a bad time of year. There are easier times of year. Like right now with the soil being looser because it's moist, things will come up a little bit easier. Be able to be pulled and dug out a little bit easier sometimes. But there are some species with the seeding, right? So getting Scotch broom before it goes to flower and seed can be really important. But if you're dealing with it at the scale that we have here on our property, it just making it disappear is a good thing in general. It doesn't matter when you're doing it because we have so much of it. Okay, so I'll move on here and I have just a few more slides, and then we can have more time to talk about invasive species management and whatnot. So I mentioned the bird blinds, and it was selfish reasoning. Like I said, I like taking pictures of birds, and was getting busted by the birds, and they would fly off. So built a couple bird blinds. I think 2 bird blinds, and it was a couple $100 worth of material for each of them. Pressure treated wood and then cedar fence boards. This one is the permanent one, so the posts are cemented in the ground. And it looks down onto the ponded area down here.
I don't think we're seeing that yet, Derek.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, and there we go.
There we go.
And then the other one is mobile because the location is actually right next to the wetland. So technically we would have needed a permit to cement in some posts. And I didn't want to do that. So I made it so that it's technically mobile. In other words, we could move if we wanted to. It's not cemented in, but it's heavy. It would be heavy to move. I don't have a picture of that one. but basically it looks very similar, except it has another set of posts, and it sort of has some side walls that provide the stability so it can just be freestanding.
And you found that to be sufficient, really, just a yeah.
One sheet.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Can't have your coffee and donuts there though, Kelly.
No, I'm
and
you really got to sneak up. I think you'd have to sneak up to the blind.
Yes.
Yeah. The advantage with both of these blinds, so this one's up on a hill. So as long as you can, this one, once you get behind the blind, you'll be okay. And then the other one that's closer to the wetland, you sort of have to come around the backside, and there's blackberries that block the view. So the birds in the wetland won't be able to see you until you get to the blind, and once you're at the blind, you're covered as well. So the other piece, so we had down by the wetland, right? This area that we were working in down by the wetland. And then we had some efforts in the Gary Oak. And in the Gary Oaks, we have blackberry and some other non-natives, but the big one that was creeping into the blackberries was Scotch broom. So here are some pictures with the community volunteers coming in. And with some weed wrenches, you can remove quite a bit of blackberry, and you get some pretty impressive piles. I'm sorry, Scotch broom. I said blackberry, but it's Scotch broom. And then in this area, like I said, there were some blackberries as well. In this area, had a student intern. All of these Gary Oak trees were surrounded by blackberries primarily in this area. And they student intern worked to clear it out, and then we've been maintaining it. And just this past weekend, we got small ones. They were not even less than 5 inches tall. And then we did put down some seed, 2 different species of lupine, some Clarkia, which I can't remember the common name of. What else did we seed? Native wildflowers primarily, and we did have some native grasses. And then there was a mix that had native grass and wildflower.
These pictures are great examples of how that Gary Oak becomes more shrubby, right? Than than a kind of a tall, majestic oak that we often think about.
Right. Yeah. These are still tall trees, but they are definitely growing in all sorts of different directions, right? And then this area here, all along here was Scotch broom. So the Scotch broom was cleared from this area. And then this is a picture we had seeded of an area, and you can see a lupine. It was just a little itty bitty lupine, no more than a couple inches tall, but hopefully it'll come back year to year, and we'll see it again. So some more in the Gary Oaks. This is a more open area, but there are some Gary Oaks. So one of the things I said that they're mature Gary Oaks. You can see how tall they are in this photo. One of the issues that we have is there are some Gary Oak saplings, but not too many like Gary Oaks that are intermediate in size. But this open area does have some Gary Oaks that are a little bit more intermediate in size, and it has a Scotch broom issue. So clearing out the Scotch broom. This is an area that had been worked on in 2019 and 2020. And then, as I said, Scotch broom grows back. So you can see in these photos, the Scotch broom here isn't necessarily too tall, but it's just growing back from seed. So you have to maintain what you do. And with planting trees and putting in seed, the other challenge that we have is, how do you water it? Even if you plant in fall is an ideal time to plant. A lot of people will recommend trying to water trees in particular through that first summer so that they get well established. our only source of water is the wetland. We don't have a any type of hose or hose attachment or anything like that on the property. So we located a 1,000-gallon water tank on the property, and we pump water from the wetland into the tank, and then from the tank to water the trees. So that also is quite labor intensive. But we have a system going. Fortunately, I don't have to water trees right now because it's raining. We're in the rainy season.
Two questions then. First of all, a recommendation on the weed wrench that that you found most effective, because there's a lot of different brands out there. And the second, with respect to the disturbance, either weed wrenching and removal of the Scots broom, have you found that it's created habitat more favorable to natural, acorns, to natural saplings just coming up, right?
Yeah. So to answer your first question, we have, I think, the original weed wrench brand, the original one that was out there, and they're quite well used. But as long as you sort of watch for rust and that type of thing, they seem to keep working quite well. I've had folks bring other brands or something, other manufacturers, and they seem to work just as well. In some cases better. I've not seen like the need to have a preference in terms of the brand or anything like that. I think I think all of them are pretty similar in design and function from what I've seen. And then in terms of creating some habitat, removing the Scotch brooming, like for Gary oak saplings, yes, we actually this weekend I had just two gentlemen working on removing Scotch broom, and they cleared an area that was probably, I don't know, I would say it was probably 200 square feet, and um, they uncovered some Gary oak saplings that were growing in there. And then the other thing that we've tried is when we've caused a little bit more disturbance, pulling blackberries or pulling Scotch broom, if there's an acorn nearby, particularly if it has already germinated this time of year, we toss that in that, and not real deep, but we toss it in that hole to see, to give it a little bit of a chance to successfully germinate and grow into a sapling. The one thing, we have no shortage of little saplings, less than 6-inch tall saplings. I see them everywhere. It's the big thing with Gary oaks; they grow really slowly. So it's hard to know how much success you're going to have when you put out little saplings, because it's like, okay, they have to make it through the first 5 or 6 years until you have some confidence. And even then, they're still pretty small. A deer could come along and nip it off, or even if it gets bigger than that, a buck can rub its antlers, on it. And yeah, there are so many. That's why we started doing the chicken wire fences. I had to use some tree tubes in some locations, which I still use those, but even the tree tubes are vulnerable. Deer can knock those over and get in after the trees in there. So the chicken wire fences are a little bit wider and taller in some cases, so it's harder for wildlife to particularly the deer, to get in after the tree or the shrub.
So how tall do you make your chicken wire fences around a sapling of it?
That's a good question. So I someone that worked in the open space program for City of Tacoma. One of my friends, he's actually in this picture right here. That's Brandon. Brandon he just started graduate school. He's going for his master's degree at British Columbia. Yeah, yep. So he's up in Canada, but I had been using tree tubes because that's what we had, and he said, oh, I don't like tree tubes. Would you consider chicken wire fences? I'm like, sure, why not? I do think that there is some value to tree tubes, particularly for smaller trees. I think plastic tree tubes. I know I'm not a big fan of plastic, but I think the plastic tree tubes do provide a bit of like a humid environment for the trees, that a chicken wire fence doesn't quite provide. But I don't really. That's more of a. I don't have a. I don't have any data to back that up. That's more of a manufacturer claim that, in my mind, sort of kind of makes sense. But it's not like I've measured the humidity inside the tree tubes versus the chicken wire. But I do like the chicken wire fencing because it'll allow more growth and the tree can be protected for longer. Most tree tubes are what 3-4 inches in diameter. So once the tree exceeds that diameter, you have to remove it. And that's the other thing. You have to remove those tree tubes. You have to remember to remove them. Otherwise the tree could get choked out in that tube.
I have a question about your watering your trees that you've planted and put in those wire cages. On the Gary Oak, do you water them more than one season? Like, do you water them the second summer that they're in place?
Yeah. Yes, we have. Gary Oaks are adapted to well-drained and drier soils. But they send down this taproot, and getting that taproot established is the key. And I think that requires a fair amount of watering, and deep watering at that. So yes, because I'm already out there watering trees that were just planted within the past year, it's like, well, I might as well give these guys that have been here for a couple years some water as well. Because a lot of work went into getting them established. And we know that we're going to have some mortality no matter what. That's just the unfortunate effect of trying to do this type of work.
By the way, I put into chat. I went to Chat GPT, and they actually referenced 2 studies at Auburn that found in significantly increased survival, and mostly double, with seedlings protected by tubes compared to non-protected seedlings.
That's good.
Yeah, some sort of protection is a good thing, right? So whether it's a tree tube or the chicken wire fence, certainly they're both providing protection from things like deer. And now, one thing that I didn't expect, we had some Gary Oak sapling in a tree tube, and I was going around. Before I had the water tank on the property, I was using a garden wagon and filling 18 1-gallon jugs of water and hauling those 1-gallon jugs over there once a week and giving each tree maybe about a half a gallon of water, which is not a whole lot, but it's what I could do. Because by the time I was done watering all those trees, it was usually happening on a Friday afternoon, and I was in the dead of summer, in the heat of summer, and I was like, okay, that's a lot.
That's a lot of commitment. That's a lot of devotion for sure.
Yes, yeah. But I walk up to a tree. I'm like, where's my tree? And by my tree, I'm like, where's the tree at? Like, we put in all this effort. Where's it? And then I look down and I see a hole, a mole or something like that had come up. It must have grabbed the acorn, because the tree is still attached to the acorn even after it germinates. and just whoop pulled it down into its tunnel and stole the tree. So it's not I've been mentioning deer and deer forage and but stuff that lives underground that they'll come and get it too. Or a squirrel can go through, they might crawl up and over chicken wire, you know. But I think we're using 1-inch chicken wire fencing, so that'll keep most critters out. And then we try to do it's probably a 18 to 24-inch diameter circle around the tree. So a deer would have a hard time reaching over the top of it and down in, because
So,
it is
so part of your message here is that volume, is just, overplant, right? Expecting that you're going to hit mortality somehow, right?
Absolutely. Our initial planting, we had a lovely community member donate 25 Gary oak saplings that she had raised for 3 years on her own, from a tree that she had in her backyard, or trees, I should say. And I think we're down. We have about 50% mortality on those trees between wildlife and the heat wave. Well, yeah, I won't say it's the heat waves. The heat waves did not help, but just the dry and hot summers, which we are increasingly having, right? Just hotter and drier.
So I have two little Gary oak seedlings that were given to me by someone who dug them out of her. She has a small stand of Gary oaks. I'm struggling with where to put it, because my understanding is they don't like rich soil. Is that right?
Not, yeah. Like they liked well-drained soil. So if you dig the hole and you find a lot of river rock and like it feels gritty because of the sand.
Not my soil.
But on the other hand, I have at my house, the squirrels have planted some acorns, and those trees, like, and the unfortunate thing is they're in flower beds right next to my house. So eventually those trees will have, they can't just grow there right next to my house or pretty close to my house. Yeah, I think they could be okay in a little bit richer of a soil, but not overly rich. And I'm not quite.
Do you think it would help if I dumped some gravel and sand and mixed it in with the soil?
That is, that's a great question. I'm not sure. Like, how rich is this, like potting soil or topsoil that you have?
No, it's just the native soil in my garden that's pretty good. The unenriched soil is pretty good. So it's not it's not dense like the stuff that these trees were potted up in, that I think came out of a sandier, more clay type of location.
Harry, could you mound up or create a berm, into which to plant that, so it is clearly above the so it clearly would drain better?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could try that.
I think, Terry, if it were to go anywhere, I would go uphill, because it's the mature Gary oak that cannot take water in excess. It will kill a Gary oak really fast. If you grow one in your yard and then you decide you have to water the yard every week or so, you will kill your oak.
Okay.
So I would get it up above the water table, which must be pretty high where you are.
Yeah, I don't have trouble with standing water. I don't have that problem.
It's that tap root that you've got to think about, and it does not want to go into where there's water.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if you just have rich soils, it'll probably still be okay. I think the water is the main component. You don't want to have too much water. And I don't have much experience because all of our soil around here um, is gravelly outwash. It's that gravelly sandy loam, which means, yeah, dig a hole and you're finding lots of the rounded river rocks, and it's very gritty soil that drains pretty quickly. So I just don't have a lot of experience with trying to plant oaks in rich soil. But I think at the nurseries that I've been to, like the native plant nurseries that have Gary oaks, they're using, like a potting soil, which is certainly much richer. So I think it would be okay. I think just as long as you don't, it's not in a location that it um, will have too much water. Okay. So yeah, we put up chicken wire cages. We did some mulch. So with mulching for trees and plants, uh, let's see, with master gardeners, you probably know this already, but you don't want it if you put it too close to the stem of the plant and like have a mound, like a volcano or a mountain, the stem will rot out, or it could rot out. What you instead want is like a volcano caldera, right? Sort of like a depression in towards the stem. And what the mulch does, of course, is um, prevents competition from weeds, what we would call weeds. And when you water, it'll also help hold the water in a little bit longer as well. And if you haven't heard, and this is particularly good for restoration sites, maybe not as good if you're doing some gardening at home and want a really nice mulch, but chip drop. And you can do it through a website. They have an app, but you don't have to use the app. I didn't want to download the app, so I just used a website. And you can get wood chips. It's local arborists, that are going around cutting trees, cutting and trimming trees, and they create this mulch, and they just have too much of it to sell. So that this is just a great way for them to so that it gets used instead of them having to find a different way to make use of it or get rid of it. So you can get chip drops for free. But in my experience and other folks I've talked to that use this service, if you pay like $20 or so as a delivery fee, I got my chip drop within like 2 days of submitting the request. So it helps offset the cost for them to deliver it, and they can deliver it right along the road. For us, they actually put it on our property. So I've only used it once for this site, but it worked out well. It's not the highest. Some people might not consider it the highest quality because it has like Douglas fir needles in it, but I don't. That doesn't bother me because it's not my garden, my flower bed next to my house. It's for some trees that just need a little bit of protection. So okay, so overall successes, and these numbers are now larger, marginally so at least. 5,000 square feet of habitat restored at least. We've planted 45 Gary oaks and about 15 of the other species of trees. At least 20 students have been educated in restoration techniques, and with the community stewardship events, well over 300 hours now. We're probably pushing 400 or more hours of volunteer time. And we've conducted tours of the outdoor lab property in coordination with organizations like the Tacoma Tree Foundation. I did estimate like how quickly we would be able to move and restore, particularly the wetland riparian area, which is where a lot of the blackberries are. It's the brush cutter can cut a lot of blackberries. It's the removal of the roots that takes a lot of time. We did a lot more seeding than tree planting. So making use of those native plant seeds. And that was, I think, primarily because of doing the work that we did underneath the Gary Oaks. Didn't really need to plant more trees under the oaks, but rather get the native grasses and wildflowers established. Not only blackberries, all invasives are very stubborn. They will grow back. It's a repeated rinse and repeat, right? You will have to keep on going back to the area and working it. It'll get easier with each time you visit, and eventually you'll get to the point that the seed bank will be empty, or for the blackberries, you won't have any stray roots that the invasives are able to grow off of. And then for me, take more pictures. I had a lot of pictures of people doing work, but I had some of those before-ish pictures because I forgot to take a true before picture. But it's really difficult for me as a person to be the person that's taking photographs because I enjoy doing the work, and I don't want to seem like the lazy person that's just doing, taking pictures. Not that that's lazy, it's needed, but I like getting my hands dirty and working alongside of people. But pictures can tell, can paint a really nice picture.
Eric, have you any experience using a transects or square meter types of sampling techniques? And is that part of the curriculum?
Yeah, so it is a part of the curriculum. I haven't incorporated it into the restored areas yet, primarily because the restored areas just aren't quite big enough quite yet. Getting there, but not quite yet. But I do in my ecology class, we 100% they learn how to do various types of transects, and then we also do quadrats, which are the square, or quadrats can be circular as well. Yep. And we do plan with the restored area to make use of transects and quadrats, even if they're on a smaller scale, to sort of track it over time. Yeah. So we want to continue with these efforts, these community stewardship events, students going out there and learning these techniques, student internships doing some of this work. I've mentioned some areas the work was done by student interns. And with a lot of it, where there's the integration, so student interns come to the community events, there's some community building and networking for the students, and community building for people that we've had people come to our events, our stewardship events, and now they don't come as often, not because they're like, I don't, too hard to work or whatever, but rather because they're leading their own habitat stewardship events at another location. So we're building community around this habitat stewardship and restoration.
Gary, I'm going to ask you a question about the kind of forest that you're hoping to achieve. And obviously you're looking at Gary Oak kind of setting, which needs pretty bare ground underneath it, not a lot of shrubs, mainly forbs, grasses, and so on. If you were looking to have a rapid Douglas fir forest, though, would you change any of the kinds of things you've done? Like, would you be so intent on removing blackberry? Is it possible that you could get your tree seedlings started, even though there are invasive plants there, and that they would eventually shade them out?
I think for Douglas firs, yes. We do have a conifer strip that is Douglas fir and western red cedar, and we don't have as many issues with invasives in that area because of the shading.
Yeah.
Where we do have some invasives coming in, it's where there's an opening in the canopy. Mm-hmm. So if you had a Douglas fir, that you're trying to establish, my approach would be to maybe not try to clear the whole area, but maybe try to clear for each tree that you want to plant a solid 5-foot diameter circle and just maintain that. And then over time, the trees might get big enough. But over that, I mean, even for a Douglas fir, which is much faster growing than a Gary oak,
Yeah.
that's still going to take several decades until the shading. Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
They don't like the shade either. The seedlings don't. So you need to get rid of the big shrubs.
right.
Are there any good references on restoring, like what has been farmland, like you've been doing, or at least part of it has been, or urban bare spaces?
I am sure that there are some good references, and I would refer to sites that have already done it. So, you might be able to find some. I've not explicitly looked because I've been able to rely on my knowledge and the expertise of others. So I mentioned Brandon, who used to work for City of Tacoma. He's been doing this type of work for throughout his career. So instead of having to go and look to see what to do in terms of a habitat restoration plan, we've just relied on our own expertise. Um, I haven't explicitly looked, but I'm sure that there is some stuff out there. The other thing that you can rely on is just sort of your own intuition, right? If you're in like for us, it's like, okay, what do we need to do to restore this? Well, what type of habitat were you looking to create? So you sort of alluded to that. Is it Gary oak or is it Douglas fir, conifer, forest, that type of thing? And that's your starting point. And then what exists on the landscape? So if you're starting off with invasives, more than likely you're going to have to do something with those invasives to get the process started. I've not noticed a ton of success with trying to plant trees in invasives, although they're incredibly resilient. Like I said, we've uncovered Gary oaks that are buried in Scotch broom and even blackberry. We've found some as well. Douglas fir, I think, are more shade tolerant. That's why the forests around here, when they reach over time, they eventually will come to be dominated by Western hemlock and Western red cedar. That the Douglas fir won't be as dominant because they're not shade tolerant. So yeah, I'm sure you could find references, but I don't have any offhand.
Okay. I would like to go to back something much further back in your talk, and that has to do with removing of blackberry. I've seen on state parklands removing blackberry simply by going in with something like a brush cutter, which chops everything up into small pieces and leaving it lying on the ground. And I know that some pieces of blackberry will reroot. So how much cleaning up do you need to do after you've cut those blackberry vines? Do you think you need to do any, or because you have to come back because of the roots, you'll get the new seedling, the new sprouts that might have come off of the branches?
Yeah, so with a brush cutter or brush hog, there's a technique to it, right? So when you're doing it with a lopper, and actually, well, yeah, I'll answer now. I was going to say I have a slide coming up that sort of gets into this, but with a lopper, like I said, cut it about 6 inches off the ground and then dig up the roots. And with that cane, we just pile it up. And in my experience, I haven't really seen any growth coming out of the piles. Maybe a couple blackberries here and there, and that's probably from from seed that was already underneath where we started making the pile. With the brush cutters, the technique is like with a weed whacker based brush cutter. And this is why you have to wear the safety equipment. For my students and myself, have the safety equipment. You start up high and you work your way down. So you're really cutting the blackberries you can barely even tell that it was a blackberry cane until you're done with it. It sort of creates somewhat of a mulch on the ground temporarily. And then in terms of whether or not, if they're not digging up the roots, it means one of two things, at least in my mind. Either they plan to keep on coming back and cutting that area frequently, or, and this might not be noticeable, you can paint the canes, which is just basically using herbicide, and you're applying that herbicide to the part of the plant that's left. And then, of course, that will be poisoned. So that could be happening in some places that you've seen as well.
I do that a lot. I cut the canes to the bottom, and then I have a little spray bottle, and I'll just spray it with herbicide on the nub, and it generally works pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've given a consideration to just do, like I said, I could go and get some herbicide at Home Depot, that there's no regulation surrounding like someone that's not pesticide certified to apply that. I want to give the correct impression to my students. That's really important to me. So and I could explain to them, hey, this is the type of herbicide that you can get at the store. And that's great that you're doing that. Like, great approach, because you're saving yourself a ton of time, and you're not disturbing the soil. That's
important. Yeah.
That's so important.
And I'm not spraying foliage. I'm just spraying the cut end.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a really good approach, whether you're doing it on a large scale or a smaller scale.
It's large scale.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Usually
it's rather tedious painting the ends of cuts canes.
When they say cutting, it usually is like you are spraying it, but you're targeting the cut ends. So as we continue our restoration efforts, one of the things this year I want to collaborate with our construction management program at the college to have them construct a greenhouse. So I actually obtained grant funding for the materials, and then they will be able to build a greenhouse to propagate native plants. And it's no longer approval pending. Our Bachelor of Applied Science degree is approved, and we've started classes. And just last week, I worked with my students we're trying to propagate some Gary oak acorns, and we have some camas seed, so we're trying to propagate the camas as well.
Yeah. Do you know how long the acorn is viable? Do they have a very long survival before, or is it a very short period of time? Scotch broom is like 40 or 80 years or something incredible. But I think the oaks are much shorter.
They are much shorter. And I think it depends on storage conditions as well. So I actually, there's a time where one of my students made like this little, it's just a little, like, it's a rock with a Gary oak acorn glued to the top, like to give people that were helping with stewardship. And like that acorn is dry. And I think probably I wouldn't say it's more than a year. I think the inside will just get too dry, but I would have to look to be sure. Most people, in terms of propagating, they go out and they'll pick up the acorns after they drop, almost immediately after they drop from the tree. and then propagate them. In fact, on this past Saturday, we had a stewardship event, and there were acorns that were already, you could see the cotyledon, the piece, the piece of the plant, the piece of the acorn tree, like its taproot essentially starting to form already. And yeah, so it's pretty quick. I don't think they're viable quite as long. They're certainly not on Scotch broom scale. I wouldn't give it more than a year, but I would have to do some research on that.
Well, Derek, your guess is good. I'm looking online at, I put in the chat this Oregon Wood Innovation Center, and so they're suggesting that it's the seeds are viable for only one season.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like I said, and Kelly, I appreciate it. I wish I had you as like a classroom aide, because students ask me questions. I was like, we can look at, and they do the same
Look it
thing.
up.
They'll hop on their phone and look up the answer, and then, hey, I found the answer. Cool, thank you. That's great. But one thing that I mentioned in terms of the future plans, and it's just been so important. Even though we're not working incredibly fast, that brush cutter can clear a lot more blackberry or a lot more Scotch broom than sometimes we have space or we have resources for seed or for planting trees, right? The financial resources to buy those things, because it's all, we really can't, we could use program funds, but we don't have a whole lot of money to support our program, like in terms of materials and stuff like that. It's sufficient, but we don't, it's not like we have thousands of dollars of extra money left over at the end of the year that we can go and buy trees or seed. That's the point that I'm trying to make. I'm not trying to say that college is cheap and not supporting our program, just that, it goes to support coursework, not as much of these type of efforts. So in addition to being able to seed and plant trees and other plants, you need the financial resources to do that, of course, but you also need to make sure that, again, invasives will come back. So make sure you get those as they come back. And if you're just forging forward and not looking back at what you've done, you won't lose, or you won't win the battle. You might lose it. Okay. So, yep. So this is where this is very brief, and we've talked a little bit more in detail about some of these. In terms of, these are manual practices. So we use a lot of manual practices for invasive plant management, because like with other things, our thought process is that if students can do it the harder way, the more manual way, they will appreciate the faster way a lot more, the faster and maybe more efficient way. But more technologically advanced way doesn't always mean better either, in my experience. Sometimes these manual practices, manual removal, work better. There are a variety of invasive plant species, and so there are the local and state noxious weed boards, and their websites are filled with great information of the different techniques, not just manual, but they will also get into if you can use an herbicide as part of your management plan. But for manual methods, for the blackberry species, Himalayan and evergreen, cutting the cane and then grubbing the roots. You could do repeated cutting, but I would say you probably have to keep on top of it. Both species are, at least the evergreen and Himalayan blackberry, they're at least somewhat evergreen. Himalayan blackberry, it will die back a little bit in the winter, but they will keep growing throughout the winter. The rainy season. English ivy, that one is you find a vine and you follow that vine back until you find it in the soil, and then you just start pulling. In some cases where it's very, very dense, you can use a burrito so you can get like an edge started, and then you just start rolling the roots and the vines on top of itself and making like a roll, a burrito, if you will. But with English ivy, I've not seen this happen in my experience, and I had some English ivy in my yard that I got rid of after much effort and many bad words said in its direction. But I've heard that even just like a single leaf from an ivy plant can grow roots and root itself again. So these, again, invasives are tricky buggers to deal with. So they recommend bagging it and sending it to the landfill, which is unfortunate. I'd rather see it composted, but
can't do it.
Yeah, I guess you could self-compost it, but if you're trying to put in a yard waste bin, they don't want it. They don't want English ivy. And then for trees, so English ivy climbs trees. I've heard of the ring of death, which is basically, you cut the vines around the tree and then pull it down off of the trunk of the tree. Everything above it will die because it's not connected to the soil anymore. And ivy will eventually kill a tree, 100%. And then the lifesaver method is somewhat similar, except for it focuses on just clearing around the base of the tree on the ground and pulling a little bit down. So I think essentially two different names for the same method. And then Scotch broom, you can pull it with a weed wrench or cut it. And I mentioned I think either can work. If I were to cut and wanted to make sure that the cutting of Scotch broom was going to be most effective, I would try to do it peak after it's bloomed, peak bloom, because again, it put all that energy into blooming. And if you cut it, we'll have the energy as we head into the dry season, as we head into summer, we'll have the energy and the resources to grow back from being cut. Probably not. And as I said, regardless of the invasive plants, one reason that they become invasive and come to dominate is because they produce a lot of seed. Scotch broom, each of those little seed pods, they look like pea pods, has 4 or 5 seeds in them. Each blackberry has, I don't know, maybe up to a dozen seeds. So there is an incredible amount of seed in each of these. So rinse and repeat. You will have to go back and keep on working the problem and fighting these guys. Another thing that I think some folks were interested in is native plant and seed sources. So I don't know if this helps you down. It's pretty far away, but for a native plant source that I've used is in Gig Harbor Woodbrick Native Plant Nursery. They are wonderful people, and they have so many different species. So I've gone there for my own personal needs in my yard, and also for restoration efforts. I did a little bit of a search to see if there were any down south a little bit more. But I wasn't 100% certain because they didn't have some of the places I found didn't have websites. So for seed, you have Pro Time Lawn and Seed. They're out of Portland, and then Northwest Meadowscapes in Whidbey Island. neither incredibly close to here in Lakewood. And one thing that people talk about is in terms of like native plants is having a more local source and knowing that the stock, right, the seed that it came from was locally sourced, because of course plants are adapted even to more local climates. But sometimes that's difficult to do. And that's why we want to start propagating our own in a greenhouse setting, so that we are harvesting seeds from where we intend to go put them back, or more locally. And then when to plant or seed, this time of year is great. Fall and into early winter. So the early to mid rainy season. If you get into the late rainy season, yes, those plants will get some of that water resource, but certainly not that full winter. And I mentioned watering anything that you plant. I don't really water things that are seeded, but things I've planted in that first summer is recommended. And for some species, it might need a second summer of watering. So we've already had some questions, but I'd be happy to stay on for a little bit longer and answer some additional questions. I know that we've been on for almost 2 hours, but y'all have already asked great questions. So
I just wanted to, by the way, this has been great, Derek, and we really hugely appreciate your time and your expertise that you're sharing with us, right? Because so a couple things I was putting out there is that Watershed Garden Works is down in Cowlitz County in Longview, and Scott and Dixie Edwards, they specialize in native plants that typically are used by WSDOT or ODOT for Department of Transportation, rehabilitation sites and things. So we've had really good luck with their species. I also put in the list that at the WSU State Conference that was just a couple weeks ago, Mark Turner actually did his presentation. There's a list there of sources that he suggests for native plants. And this, of course, is all in addition to Fourth Corner Nurseries up in Bellingham, right? That are just, where we've definitely purchased. You got to purchase large stocks, right? It's like quantity 50 for everything. But you can definitely get a lot of material from them. And then, of course, the conservation districts. We're all big fans of Thurston, I know, has a sale. Clark County has a sale. And of course, the sales come at the wrong time, right? It's like in February, right? So it's just a lousy time to be picking up material, but it's cheap. So
yeah, that is good. And the Native Plant Society website lists a lot of native plant sources in the state. So you just look and find one that's fairly close to you. But I want to thank you, Derek. It's been really interesting. And I wanted to ask you, you have not mentioned anything about Japanese knotweed. I hope you are free of it.
We have, and it's technically not even, so one thing that I didn't point out, so y'all saw the urban development around our property, surrounding our property. But to the east is Mountain View Cemetery. It's a fairly large cemetery. And so it's technically on their property, but there is only one knotweed. And it's not spreading. And like I said, it's not on my property. With knotweed, that is one that it's my understanding. And again, I don't have experience with it because we don't really have any on our property anyway. But my understanding is the only way to deal with that one is an herbicide application. That's the best way to deal with it.
Yeah, and even that's very tricky.
Yep.
So I'm glad you don't have any on your property, and may it ever be.
I am as well, because where I'm from in Pennsylvania, it grows quite readily along the Schuylkill River. And yeah, it doesn't do the job that trees do. It doesn't hold soil. So it doesn't help with stream bank erosion along streams and wetlands. And yeah, and it dominates. It just takes over like any other invasive.
So Derek, picking up on that, going back to your East Coast experience, I mean, is there any hope for the kudzu, right? That's all over, the mid-Atlantic area in particular? I mean, I'm crushed whenever I'm back into, say, DC area, right? And you see kudzu just overwhelming the forest there.
Yeah. And it started in the South, I believe, like in the Southeast. It was all over the place in Mississippi. In fact, my parents came to visit, and my mom's like, "What is that growing all over everything?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's kudzu." I oh, I think the only hope, because they've tried so much. They've tried, like herbicide applications, like really really heavy herbicide applications, and maybe a biocontrol. So finding are y'all familiar with biocontrols?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe. And I don't even know if there's any research going into that, but that's about the only thing that and that's one thing with Scotch broom on our property. The gall mite, the mite that attacks the Scotch broom, we have it on our property, and it didn't completely eradicate it in the region that it was in, but it killed the bigger stuff. So maybe a biocontrol, but like I said, I don't even know if there's any research going into that. Like if you think about and I'm sorry, keep on turning around because it's downpouring here. So I get distracted easily. Like with a lot of our invasives, you can manage it, but I don't think you're going to get rid of it. We're never going to get rid of our blackberry, the Scotch broom, and Himalayan, or I'm sorry, English ivy. Like not on a large scale. You can do it. We're doing it on our property and having some success, but like all the Scotch broom that grows everywhere, yeah, like it's not going to go anywhere. At least not that I can see. So I think it's one of those ones that we're going to have to live with. And then yeah, the Asian giant hornet, right? Which I think entomologists have agreed to call something else because they didn't want Asian in the name or something like that. I recall seeing that recently, but that's another one, right? Like that one. So that one, because, and this is the thing with invasive species, with the giant hornet, because it's fairly new and it was detected fairly quickly. That is one that they are really putting a lot of effort into when they finding nests and then killing the nests, killing the hives, because we still stand a chance. And things like zebra mussels, and there's another invasive mussel species, quahog. Is that no? That might not be it. Anyway, there's a couple invasive mussels. Once they get into an area and get pretty well established, they're difficult to get rid of. But if you can prevent them from getting in there, that's why there are boat checks. In terms of like checking for the bilge and stuff like that.
This article I just posted, just based upon what you're saying, it looks like there actually is a Megacopta, cribaria, which is a wasp that actually does feed on kudzu. The unfortunate side, it also feeds on soybeans. So they're just so
I have to be
careful what you wish for, right?
Maybe
exactly.
Climate change will get them.
Yeah, and when you said, I just saw, I didn't read the full link. I saw the Asian wasp, but I thought you were referring to the Asian giant hornet. But yeah, I know in Pennsylvania, which this is another one, I grew up knowing it as the gypsy moth rather. But the common name they, uh, um, what is, yeah, when you grow up calling something and then the name changes, it's difficult to
Tell
remember
me
the
about
name.
it.
Anyway, if you look up gypsy moth, that's you'll find a lot of, it's very prevalent in the Northeast. Um, uh, that one they tried some insecticides, and then sort of kind of helped. It helps. But the other thing that they tried was a biocontrol. It was actually not a ladybug, like our true native ladybug or lady beetle, but it was actually an Asian, which I think that's, you see a lot of them even here. So they released those as a biocontrol, and it really didn't work. It didn't help control the gypsy moth at all, and um, for my grandparents, I remember my grandmother, they get into people's houses and they'll crawl on the walls and everything. And my grandmother would go and suck these ladybugs. They weren't true, again, they were the Asian ladybugs. They weren't the native ones that we'd like to have around. Um, and she would suck them up with the vacuum cleaner, and she had one of those bag vacuum cleaners that you could open up the lid, and so she would take it outside and release them because she didn't know that they're at that point pretty much invasive, you might as well say. She didn't want to kill them. That only lasted a couple of years, and then she started burning the bags because she got tired of sweeping them up, and she also learned that they weren't, they didn't belong there. So yeah, sometimes when biocontrols are proposed, a lot of research goes into it to make sure that if they aren't a native species, that they won't become a problem themselves.
Other questions for Derek? Other comments?
Harry.
I have a question. A really great presentation. I really have enjoyed your presentation, Derek. I'm unfamiliar with evergreen blackberry. What is evergreen blackberry?
Yeah, so it is an invasive species of blackberry, and
Evergreen.
Yeah, it is an evergreen.
Huh.
And yeah, it is an invasive species. It has a much different leaf shape than the Himalayan blackberry.
Is it the one with the really jagged edges? Is it that one?
Yep,
Oh,
absolutely.
okay. Okay. I never thought of that as evergreen, but I guess
Sort of.
so. I don't have very much.
But how's that different from the native, right? The spreading blackberry.
The trailing or
Yeah.
spreading, yeah. So the trailing blackberry won't. It's not a shrub. The other evergreen and Himalayan blackberry grow more like a shrub, whereas the trailing blackberry, yeah, it does what it sounds like. It grows along the ground. It's more of a vine.
It's an ankle grabber.
It is.
And it
Yes,
has
it is an
beautiful
ankle
blue stems.
Yes, the whitish blue stems are what I look for the native. But you do have to be careful with that because
older vines aren't.
If it's more sun exposed, the anthocyanins, the red pigments, will be more. It's sort of, they sort of get sunburned, basically. So they'll express more of those red pigments, so you won't see as much of that. What I tell my students is look at the leaflets. The invasive species tend to have leaflets in clusters of 5, and the native species of berries, not only the trailing blackberry, but also salmonberry as well, will have leaflets in clusters of 3. That's not a hard and fast rule, but it works pretty well.
But you're right. I can see that in the pictures. The 2 links I put in there. The first link was for the, was for the evergreen, and it's got the leaf. That's the picture there is the 5, and the other picture on the CalScape website of the spread of the California Blitz is the 3.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Other questions for Derek? This has been great, Derek. Seriously, I'm glad we caught you on Monday. And it because I appreciate your Tuesdays got to be exhausting. And congratulations on starting up a bachelor's program. That's a big deal.
It is. It is good.
Yeah, thank you.
Very
yeah,
good.
It is a big deal. And my co-instructor and I had a meeting with my dean. And my co-instructor she's not teaching any of the bachelor's program classes yet. And it's not that she's getting off easy or anything like that. Basically what it comes down to is the way the program was designed. We did move some classes that were previously in our associate's programs into the bachelor's program. So the students that are coming back for the bachelor's program, they've already completed those classes. So why have someone retake an environmental law class that they've already taken, right? No need to do that. But anyway, I was mentioning to my dean this morning that I get through the end of Wednesday, and I'm pretty and I'm not. I'm still by most people's standards a spring chicken, right? I'm pretty young yet, but Tuesdays 9 to 5 and Wednesdays 9 to 3, and that's just instruction. That's not email management, other meetings, curriculum development, grading. All the other. Some of it's fun. All the other stuff.
And of course, though, your compensation, right, is that you're given just buckets of money, right, to go do this, right?
Yeah. Yes. I will say I'm fortunate. I am doing well for myself in terms of compensation, but it is a salaried position, so the overtime that I've been putting in is also a lot, but it's worth it for the students, and it's only this too shall pass.
What do you think? And that is the final question I have is that what do you think the students take away? When they're out there doing the field work and and getting this practical experience, do they share with you their big takeaway, their big learning moment?
I think some students are, and it's the same when I do learning and professional development to keep up my craft. It's all in the reflection. And that reflection piece often has to be forced, even for me. Someone has to ask you, and I don't always do a good job of asking students what they take away. But what I have been doing lately is we do a debrief. Okay, what could we do better, right? So what I have students do, and again, this is coming up in a couple weeks for the students that I currently have. We will go out there, and the first week for the Scotch broom, I'll say, okay, we're going to go back and maintain this area. It's been previously removed, but we're having some grow back. We're going to maintain. And then we go to the blackberry area, and I say, okay, this is an area that we've started on. What do you want to do? I let them sort of decide, and then we go and do it. And then when I tire them out from 3 hours of good physical labor, we come back in the classroom and I say, okay, this was what your plan was that I let you sort of establish. Now, trying to implement that plan, what would you do differently? So that reflective piece, and a lot of the feedback that I hear is one of two things: focusing on one species at a time. So in some areas you have blackberry with English ivy growing under, on the ground underneath of it. And there's a tendency to want to do both, or spread your focus too thin. And then the other thing that a lot of students say that is a takeaway from them in terms of the work itself is setting goals. So, and setting realistic goals. We want to clear this area, this set area. And if you set a realistic goal, and you clear that area, well, you've met your goal, and that makes you feel good. And then you can say, anything that I do beyond that is just bonus. So working small chunks instead of like, so it's sort of like trying to see the trees. How's the saying go? The trees through the forest, or the opposite way, the forest through the trees. Anyway, in that when you set goals and meet them, it gives you motivation, and it also gives you something to work towards. And then in terms of taking that experience and part of the reflection piece is also they can see how it's needed on the flat property, but again, going and identifying other areas that the work needs done, and what can they do to lead that work. Because this work, honestly, it's not difficult to lead this type of work. Per se, the difficult part comes in making the decisions on like what to plant and where to plant or what to seed. That's probably the most difficult part. The invasive species removal is actually pretty straightforward, but for the most part. So yeah, that reflection piece, and then asking them what they would do differently, so that if they do that as part of their career, they actually have given some thought to that.
Derek, this has been great, and it just, I know I speak for all of us here, and it, in terms of our appreciation for your time, your expertise, right? And the blood, sweats, tears, and the scratches that undoubtedly you carry with you, the scars of, invasive plant removal, right? That it are part of it comes part of the drill.
Yes. There are. Oh yeah, I guess that's another piece. Get yourself a good pair of gloves. If you're fighting blackberries, you can find leather gloves that are that have some nice, like, thick insulation in them, which is really nice this time of year. Helps keep your hands warm as well, but it also protects them quite well. I've seen some people that they've found gloves that go up to like their arm, like their elbow rather. So yes. Yeah, protect yourself, because I definitely have earned my fair share of scratches, but I appreciate the opportunity to come and present. I know that it was a long presentation, but it was interactive. Y'all were
and you can appreciate, Derek, from our perspective, right, is that we're out talking to the public, right? So the lessons that you've shared with us, right, we hope to pay it forward, right, in our dialogue with other clients and other people. So that's why this is, hence the questions, and hence why we're eager to understand best practices from your perspective, because it helps us as we exchange with the public.
Yes.
Good luck to you, Derek.
Yeah, thank you. And good luck and if y'all have like questions, have an area that you're working on, there's two. I would be happy to try to provide some insight. Now, of course,
not on Tuesdays, right?
Yeah, time permitting. But another, the conservation districts and Noxious Weed Board, Native Plant Society, there are experts in all of those organizations, experts that, quite frankly, they know more than I do. I've learned a lot from those folks as well, and they've supported me in a lot of ways too. So, and then of course your own research, and there's a lot of information on the internet as well. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate you giving me some time to talk a little bit about our program, what the program is before we got into the meat of the invasive species management presentation. So
great, thanks so much.